As William Faulkner said, the past is not dead, it's not even past. This holds true in all places and for all histories, even Erie. In some places in the city, the resonance with the past is visceral, uncannily so. Academy High School on State Street is one of the places where it's hard to miss parallels with the past. As Erie shows us, the eruptions of frustration and anger at the lack of a change in America's racial status quo in the 1960s were not isolated to the likes of Selma, Montgomery, or Jackson. The long-standing poor treatment that Black Americans received was as equally present for those whose grandmothers and grandfathers made the Great Migration north in the early 20th century as for those who chose to stay in the South. Minority housing conditions in Erie, for example, were deplorable into the 1950s, and the growing national civil rights movement at this time pushed Erie's local NAACP to address racial discrimination in the area. This was part of the lead-up to a widespread local and national frustration at a lack of real change in the 1960s, a frustration that can be demonstrated by an incident at Academy High School in 1968. On April 4th, 1968, there was a significant uprising at Erie's Academy High School. Though the underlying issues were many years in the making, it was triggered by an incident the day before. On April 3rd, a white teacher had hit a black student with a wooden pointer for not obeying their demands to return to their seat quick enough. This provoked the student to a physical altercation, and another black student joined in, with the teacher ultimately becoming injured. This led to a number of students petitioning the principal the next day, only to see the principal rip up the petition, leading students to cause a disturbance. The disturbance soon spread into the street, with cars damaged, one overturned, and 14 students arrested. It was not the last of its kind, with similar, albeit smaller, uprisings occurring at other Erie schools. This uprising reflected many racial issues that the Erie School District had, outside of the racist treatment of black students by almost completely white teachers and administrators. Another one of these issues was the appalling rates of hiring black teachers. The uprising helped provide a jolt that would lead to this issue in particular being partly addressed, with parents and students demanding an aggressive recruitment of black teachers from the South and largely receiving it. Another glaring problem that underlaid the Academy Uprising of 1968 was the complete failure to teach black history to students in the city of Erie. Despite this being such a big problem, there were those that tried to address it, such as Celestine Davis, a young black school teacher who was teaching black history well before anyone else in the city. On top of this, she also pressured the city to recognize a Martin Luther King Jr. holiday in the 1970s. This was a full 10 years before it became a national holiday. In the same vein, there was the Freedom School, which was created on the east side of Erie around 1970 with the goal of addressing the general failure to teach black history in the Erie School District. The kind of frustration seen in Erie and the issues that caused it could be found all across the country at that time. This is despite Erie generally being able to avoid much of the violence that most American cities witnessed. The country and the civil rights movement of the 1960s seemed to be falling apart, with Martin Luther King Jr. being murdered only a few days later and presidential hopeful Robert Kennedy not long after that. The Vietnam War also continued to rage on, much to many Americans' horror. These turbulent times are not the only of their kind and relate very closely to ours today. The summer of 2020 saw racial justice protests on a massive scale, with people of many backgrounds all over the country mobilizing in the fight for racial justice, equity, and equality. The events at Academy High School in 1968 help us to see how Erie was part of a broader national conversation and movement on race and justice. Furthermore, one can see how that time in Erie's history parallels with our lives here today. Another indication that the past is not dead and not even past.